everyone. And oh, as we come back into a sense of live community with each other, just check in with yourself. Check in with maybe there's a sense of curiosity, maybe there's a sense of sincerity, maybe there's a sense of duty. What's your sense in this moment of why you're here or how you're here? It took effort, and something had to happen for you to show up on this Zoom meeting. There's something that, I don't know, is it wanting to learn something that you didn't know before, or what is it that gets you to a Dharma sitting group, especially an online one? So a few weeks ago, John Travis and I, our founding teacher, we did a half day long retreat on natural awareness. In the past, I've done that retreat as awareness of awareness, but John liked the title of natural awareness, and that really resonated for me. And it just because our awareness is so native, it's so indigenous to us, it's so basic that we don't really, in a sense, explore it. Um, it's just there. We don't necessarily recognize that as an element that is separate from our experience, and in some ways it's not separate from our experience, but it's an aspect of our experience that we can begin to acknowledge and explore. And this has sort of profound implications for how and who we are in our lives, because as we begin to explore, it's like, there's what's happening in our lives. There's the five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, or touching, the sensations of our bodies. And then there's the thoughts, the mental formations, the mental objects that run through our minds. And these are kind of like, this is the content. This is as Joseph Goldstein calls it, this is the six-piece orchestra, and the music is your life. And yet we can also say that these things might be going on, and yet there's this capacity to receive them, to know them, to be conscious of them, to be aware of them. This is our awareness. It's kind of like, if I am going to have open heart surgery, they're going to give me a lot of drugs and other things so that I won't be consciously aware of them cutting open my chest. But experience is definitely happening, but there's not an awareness of it in the moment. So, can we tease out these elements, the what's that are happening in this quality of ourselves, to receive and be aware of the what's that are happening? This is a huge distinction. This is kind of, in a way, one of the biggest, I would say, hurdles and yet also opportunities of our practice. As we sit down and pay attention in a very basic and empirical, empirical way towards our experience, we begin to see that, okay, there's the experience, but there's also sort of the sense of the space or the environment, the terrarium in which our experience is happening. And that opens us up to some very fundamental and basic possibilities for investigating and exploring our sense of our moment by moment reality. So, like I said, a few weeks ago, John and I gave a half day long on natural awareness, and tonight I wanted to turn that sense of natural awareness into an exploring of natural dharma. So if we have a sense of awareness itself as not opposed to, but as distinct from the experience itself, as a prior condition, as a necessary condition of experience, then can we begin to sort of interrogate our sense of ourselves? And I think that one of the most fundamental, this is a question that arose for me sort of organically on my first longer retreat. And it's been something that has been incredibly intriguing and liberating for me as I've explored it over the years. And so, this fundamental basic question, am I generating my awareness like some kind of a wind up toy? Or is a sense of me, my physicality, all the elements of my life, the thoughts, everything else, is a sense of that arising in awareness itself, and not that I'm generating my awareness as opposed to everybody else generating their awarenesses, all of these separate little wind up toys, but a sense of me arising in a broader context of, or a universal context of awareness. And it opened up, one of the things that came alive for me is like, well, since I was a child, I've been going to the movies. And, in a movie, there's frames per second, like, I don't know, 35 frames per second, something like that. There's sound, there's image, there's a plot line, so there's the thought element of it. It doesn't have the smell or the taste. In some cases, it has bodily sensations when it's loud enough. But then I worked for a company called Autodesk that makes the drafting solution called AutoCAD, computer-aided design, and they had a thing called a technology called the Cyberspace Developers Toolkit (CDK), and this allowed developers to build virtual worlds where you could put on a headset, you could have things attached to your hand and around your body. You could be in an immersive environment where as you turn your head, everything is refreshing itself. So you see a world around you as you touch or interact with things. There's little sensors on your fingertips that are indicating that you're touching something. There's heat sensors in your chest area that are, registering heat. I mean, it was a really interesting piece of technology. And currently, there are these virtual worlds where you literally can put on the headgear and the body gear and be immersed in a whole world environment. So I think that the benefit that we have as modern humans is that we can, in a sense, understand. It's like, oh, wait a second. This idea of us arising as a constantly refreshing image and felt sense within awareness is not so far off of our movies, of the virtual reality or augmented reality that's, you know, poised to become more and more a part of our lives. I just think it's fascinating. Um, and if we are not generating our awareness, but if we are arising in every moment as a part of a broader sense of awareness, this begins to put a new light on our sense of the dharmas. So the word dharma or dhamma literally means the way things are in its most basic interpretation as a word. Um, and so if we begin to look at what the dharmas or the dhammas are pointing towards from this perspective of, oh, wait a second, you know, there's not an individual me generating my sense of awareness, but a broader sense of awareness in which I and everything else is arising. It's like, oh, wait a second. Everything is just kind of, in a sense, I, myself, and everything around me is sort of an appearance within this, this mystery of receptivity, of inclusivity, of knowingness. Um, but it's not just that it's this sort of disjointed set of appearances. There's also a lawfulness to it. There's a consistency. And so this gives rise to the dhammas or the dharmas and enables us to, kind of navigate this reality and this world of which, you know, there's an inhabiting. So let's look at some of those aspects, and certainly when we look at the wisdom of the dhammas or the dharmas, the first place that a lot of people start at is the three characteristics, the characteristics that are present in every moment of experience. And they are anatta, anicca, and dukkha, not self, change, and suffering. So anatta is a very interesting aspect. And typically for people that are coming to Buddhist practice, this is the most radical and challenging invitation of all of Buddhist practice. And it's this idea of not self. So, we typically walk around without having been exposed to some kind of practice. took a walk around. Oh, there's me. I, me, my. This is me. I'm going along, and there's some sense of my elemental nature and who I am, and this is me. Back in the day of the Buddha, there was a great deal of debate about what the core of the me was. In Hindu philosophy, there was the Atman, the soul, the sense of personal self that is unchanging. And yet the Buddha said, actually that's not so solid. If you anywhere you look for the self, you're going to find an ephemeral ghost. There's not something solid that you can find at any point that you would explore. So back in the day, at the time of the Buddha, people would come to him to have sort of debate with him. And when quote unquote scholars would come to ask the Buddha about self and not self, they would say, is there a self or is there no self? And oftentimes the Buddha would remain silent. He would not answer the question. And at the end of the day, the offering in the teachings of Buddhism is not either a no self, that there is no self, or that there is a self, an Atman. The teachings of Buddhism are simply that there is not self, that one cannot, with direct, sincere investigation, find a lasting sense of, essence or self. And so the idea of not self is really one of moving beyond a sense of I, me, my, of self. And it's moving towards a different possibility. It's moving towards a possibility of, oh, wait a second. There is a sense of me that's arising and being refreshed on a moment by moment basis. But is that something that I can call myself? Is that something that is fundamental and essential? So if we look at a sense of ourselves as arising and passing in the moment as a projection of this awareness that we're all a part of, all of a sudden, that sense of not self begins to make a lot of sense, begins to become natural, basic. There's no self because it's all just a projection, but in a lawful and familiar way in awareness. And if we have that perspective of our sense of self, then the perspective of change, it's like, oh, wait a second, every moment of my life is kind of this refreshing, this sense of a movie screen refreshing itself, or a VR system refreshing itself. Anicca, or change, becomes the basic fabric. As I move my head from one direction to another, I'm literally refreshing my frame of visualness. I'm literally refreshing my reality as I touch things, as I smell things, as I taste things, as I feel things. It's all a part of, in a sense, a movie that's updating itself. And so when I begin to really take this to heart, as I begin to incorporate and integrate this, it's like, wait a second. I don't let go of the fact that I'm a human being with needs, wants, desires. I've got to stay alive. I've got to navigate this 3D conditional material plane. And yet, it's held in a different context. And we see that there's so much less control than we thought we had. So, if there's not a controlling essential self at the center of things, and things are changing and refreshing and updating in every moment, then if we try and hold on to them and get them just right and how we'd like them to be, we can't do that. It's a fool's errand. And trying to control that which cannot be controlled sets up struggle and suffering and strife. And this is dukkha. This is unhappiness. This is suffering. So we begin to see that, oh, wait, things are not so personal. They're changing in every moment. And if I try and hold on and control them, I am for sure going to suffer. From the perspective of, I'm not generating my awareness, but there's a broader sense of awareness in which I am arising, these things become default. They're obvious, they're native. There's nothing to do or figure out about them. It's just the truth of how things are, the truth of Dharma. And so then when we come to the Four Noble Truths of uh, there is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's the cessation of suffering, and there's a path towards the cessation of suffering, we can go, oh, wait a second. Yeah, suffering happens when I try to control things. There's craving for things to be a certain way. If there's a relaxation of that, then I can relax into basically seeing, feeling, being a reality of awareness manifesting itself. And when I have direct connection with that, it's like, oh, there's nothing left to do. There's peace. There's nothing left to strive or crave for. And the Eightfold Noble Path is just basically, okay, well, if I'm in a good direction, if I've got basically a wise orientation and an ethical way of living and a productive form of practicing, then that's going to lead me towards deeper and deeper realization of this. Because even though I might have recognized this, it's like the old habits, the ways of being may not have died down. And so we've got to continuously, sort of, in a sense, practice and immerse ourselves in the Dharma, in our practice, so that we can just basically, oh, okay, maybe I can shift to a different perspective that's so, I mean, if I fall asleep, it feels like, oh, wow, I fall asleep. I'm generating my consciousness, I'm generating my awareness. If I fall asleep, there it goes. But maybe am I a receiver, like a radio receiver of consciousness and awareness when I'm awake? It's ways in which we begin to play around with the possibilities. And then at the end of the day, it's kind of like if we, it's sort of like, well, if I embrace this, what happens to me? What happens to who I am? What happens to my sense of free agency or my possibility of being in the world, of doing good things in the world? You know, that we begin to explore this does not mean that we have to give ourselves away. One of the fundamental core aspects of Buddhism is the idea of the two truths. There is both, yes, there's an understanding that maybe this is all appearances within awareness, but there's also the reality of our humanity, the basicness of our lives. The relative is there just as vibrantly as the unconditional. And so we're called to, in our Buddhist practice, to hold both of those, not to abandon or deny or suppress anything, but to just be fully here and truthful. And so I remember being on a retreat and asking James Baraz, my wonderful teacher, I said, James, I've looked on this retreat deeply into karma, and I realized there's nobody there doing it. But how do I navigate my life? The moment by moment choices I make. And James said something that's been very helpful. He said, until you are fully enlightened, when you consider whether there's a choice or not, choose wisely. Act as if you do have a choice and choose as wisely as you can based on that. Yes, there is a time, there is a possibility of simplifying into just the flow of unfolding that is your life, where there is no separation, there is no confusion, there is no other. It's just simply a unity unfolding itself. Maybe you've had experiences of this. I know a lot of people have. And there is a sense of, ease and flow, and and maybe that you've had an experience of, there's nothing else needed, nothing extra, nothing less. It's just this basic, ah, such a relief in a way. And yet, maybe you've noticed that that might last for a while, and then all of your familiar neuroses or complexities uh, come back and overlay the simplicity itself. And it's okay. There's this process, there's this, there's this coming back home, coming back to naturalness, the natural dharma, the natural way that things are. But it comes from a different perspective. It comes from not necessarily I'm doing this or I'm generating this. It comes from a letting go, a letting be. It comes from a possibility of nothing else is needed. You know, I remember being with the hugging saint of India, Amma, supposedly a fully enlightened being, amazing woman. She would hug people for, I'm assuming she probably still does it now that the pandemic is dying down. But she would literally hug, you know, 50,000 people in a day, and stay up for 22 hours and just do that, you know, day after day after day, hardly needing rest, so charged up by life and just completely alive and present in every moment. So she was asked one time, there was a question and answer group in a retreat that she was doing that I was a part of, and one of the questions to her was, what's it like when a fully enlightened being meets another fully enlightened being? And she said, it's like when a zero meets a zero. And I just thought that was such a lovely answer. It's like when there's a recognition that I'm not doing this, but this is an unfolding in the space of a broader context. And if I'm aligned with that, then there's not a sense of needing anything else. There's nowhere to get to, nothing to do. And yet there's a sense of not sort of lackadaisical, just, oh, let's let it all go. There's a sense of deep and direct engagement. There's a sense of presence, of intimacy, of engagement, of immersion. So in China, back quite some time ago, the sixth Zen patriarch, Huineng, was asked what his definition of enlightenment was. And he said, an appropriate response. I think that's such a beautiful definition, because when we have, you know, kind of relaxed our sense of doership, when we have embraced the possibility that, oh, I'm not generating my awareness, but the sense of my life is an arising within a broader context of awareness, then there's a giving away of agency and doership, and there's more of a sense of alignment, immersion, and flow. And so we begin to sort of pay attention more to the rhythms of the moment, and allow an appropriate response to arise by itself. I was a friend of mine that I'm here with, and I'm actually in North Carolina right now, and a friend of mine has been doing these leadership trainings, and one of the key things that they offer, and it's basically mindfulness is what they're teaching, the core of what we do in our practice. And the idea is that if you just have a moment of pause, if you just have a moment of not being led around by your experience, that there is a possibility, there's a space, and in that space, another possibility, another option might arise, so that you're not just acting out that which you have acted so many times before. So it's kind of, what would your life be like if you operated from a sense of not the awareness as your fundamental sense of self, but just simply that there's this mystery of awareness and your life happening within it? It's an interesting question to ask yourself. So I thought I've been babbling and I didn't leave time for the questions that I thought I would, but I want to leave you with that. What would your life be like if you weren't generating your awareness? If awareness was something a sense of you was arising within in a lawful way, in the way things are, as a Dhamma, as a Dharma. What if you were virtual reality? This is, to me, something that it's something that came up for me early in my practice, and I realized that it's kind of the fundamental reorientation that my practice is, in a sense, exploring. And so, anyways, I leave you with that possibility. So, we're going to just do a moment of metta or loving kindness, and I invite you to close your eyes. Just feel into yourself. Feel that sense of weight, that sense of temperature, that sense of movement that makes up your body and your sense of yourself. And just feel also into that sense of space, the space that these sensations are arising in, the sense of space within your body, this openness and stillness in which those sensations happen, and feeling out around your body. Feeling to that openness and stillness. You don't have nerve cells that go out there, but if you could feel the space around your body, what would it feel like? What do you imagine it would feel like? Or can you actually feel that sense of space? And if you can feel the space in and around your body, it's like, oh, wait a second. Maybe it's not bounded. Maybe it's not discrete. It's not held back. So I'm happening within this receptive, knowing, open space. And other people are happening in that. Trees, walls, buildings, cars, roads, towns, people, dogs, bears, deer, wildlife, sky, clouds, everything that I'm familiar with is happening in this openness. There's not a me that's separate from all of it. There's an underlying unity which is expressing itself and appearing to itself through all of these aspects. And so, yes, on one level, there's a me that needs to make sure I don't walk in front of a speeding bus and get flattened. And there's also this kind of unity. And it's not some big deal. It's basic, it's natural, it's native, it's indigenous. The action of love is to include, the action of fear is to exclude, to protect, to separate. When we come into connection with the basics of a broader awareness, that is fundamentally inclusive. That's the basis of love. So if we can include ourselves, can we include each other? We already are. And if we can include each other, can we include our world? That in all of its complexity and flaws and ridiculousness, so deeply and dearly needs to be held and included. And we can feel this sense of heartfulness and warmth and love extending out through the space that encompasses us, each other, and everything around us, our world. And we might, as we look into this basic inclusiveness, notice that there's this just basic friendliness. This wish that we may be happy and that all we encounter may be happy. Just touching into that core of friendliness, this basic universal wish that we and all beings might be truly, truly happy. So, thank you so much for your practice.